Good morning. It's May 20th, 2014. In keeping with the overall purpose of this blog, which is to know me and who I am, I ran across one of those lovely sayings, tidbits that show up on the internet and Facebook. I'll read it to you because I think it says everything. I don't mean to interrupt people. I just randomly remember things and get really excited. And then there's an afterthought. Someone has added that, and if you don't blurt it out immediately, it poofs into thin air. And so that brings me to this wonderful world of hobos. Now, granddaughter Olivia and friends have a playground where they are making believe and so on, and collecting things, and in general having kind of fun kids should have. Yeah, apparently it's a little unsightly, and Mark happened to make the remark to Krista that it looked like a hobo camp. Well, Krista then told Thelma, and Thelma, said to Krista, well, tell Olivia that her great aunt, went to a hobo camp and knows about hobos. Well, that would be her Aunt Lorraine. And as this all occurred on our trip to California, it brought up hobos. Well, that triggered a number of things in my mind, primarily the depression. I had no experience with hobos. I don't think my family had any experience with hobos. However, my mother spent, as I understand it, a fair amount of time at what would be called, in those days, the Indian camp. And the different tribes, Indians, had a camp outside of Sheridan, and kids used to go down there and play and bring home, souvenirs and that sort of thing. So that got me really intrigued about the hobo thing. I've got to remember to say that M. Colstead next door, whom you kids will know, grandkids won't, has this marvelous recipe for hobo bread. And when the girls were young, we collected the necessary ingredients and made hobo bread. Now, the recipe is in this house, someplace written down, and I'll try to locate it and either insert it some way into this blog, or I will email everybody so that they can try it out. They're going to be really surprised at how incredibly simple it is and how good it tastes. So on to the world of hobos this morning. It turns out that, if you spend a little time with good old Wikipedia, you can learn a great deal about hobos. So I'm not going to repeat everything that's in there. Some key things. Hobos were differentiated completely from tramps. They were different than bums. Hobos, it turns out, has a long history. The name dates back somewhere around 1890. And evidently in 1906, a professor did a exhaustive study and determined at that time that there were roughly 500,000 hobos in the United States. And that number greatly increased during the 30s and during Depression. Now, hobos, it turns out, have an entire culture. They have a museum. They have quite an exhaustive vocabulary. There are some words in there that have meaning to my generation that won't to a younger generation. But they're kind of fun. And it's, it just adds to the understanding and the, I guess, the romance or whatnot of the whole concept. Not only did they have a vocabulary, they had a code system so that they could communicate with other hobos in a meaningful way. Now, this is where Thelma's family comes into play, because evidently Thelma's mother always provided a meal, and her house had somehow been marked by the hobo community, and they knew to stop there and ask for food and work for it in return. The more commonly used signs, it turns out, is that the sign of a cat signifies a kind lady lives here. As Ronnie put it, he said, "I don't know how they marked our house. They did. And whatever the sign meant, it meant a good woman lives here." And so you will find that interesting to read. And then now, poof, another idea. While in Washington, when Krista and Mark made their home there, and we visited, Mark got us going on the museum the Smithsonian Museum, where they, well, maybe it isn't. They, at any rate, collected all of the information about coding and how coding worked. And it now comes back to my mind and sticks in there. There was one whole department that was dedicated to quilts, and quilts were often hung out to wash and dry. But interestingly enough, within the quilt were written messages. So a square, quilt square, would mean you can stop here, it's safe here, go on, you know, whatever the term signified. And they have some of the original quilts that have been preserved from that time. And that alone was interesting. They had, if you recall your history, the service army basically, and probably the Navy, had a signal corps. And if you stop and think about it, that's just what it was. It was a coding system, whether it would be flashing lights, whether it be smoke from one hilltop to another. And the Indians, of course, perfected that. So it's very, that in itself is very interesting. The thing that strikes me most, and I'm running out of time, is the ethical code that the Hobos developed and is written down. And you will find that on page 10 of Wikipedia, and everyone should read it because it is literally the most fascinating code and a way to live. And it applies to every single one of us. None of us are exempt from this. And then it suggests some books to read, so I may do so. In the meantime, I encourage Olivia and her friends to wish them the best in their hobo camp, and hope that they can learn something from it. And for the rest of us, I'd like to end with another thought that pops into mind, and that is a quote that Rebecca posted on her blog, My Life is a Cartoon. And it reads like this: taste all manner of life, try everything, be curious, and inquire for yourself. Don't turn your back on life. And with that, I wish you all carpe diem.